Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Political Pulse. My name is Joseph Goodman. I'm your host. And joining me today is a good friend and former president of the Yale Political Union, Conor Crawford. Now, Conor, we'd like to start off the show with a fun question. Simple, fun, you'll get us started. Who is your favorite president and why?
Speeches especially, Joseph. The rhetoric is just astonishing. And I would definitely say Lincoln.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say Calvin Coolidge, because I can tell you, the two guests that we had on the show prior to you, Mr. Harry Graver and Mr. Shannon Connors, both came on the show, and this wasn't coordinated at all. They both said Calvin Coolidge. So I'm glad that sanity has been returned to the Political Pulse.
Who very well might have caused World War II.
Calvin Coolidge? Calvin Coolidge?
Radical isolationist.
I mean, he wouldn't have caused World War II, though, but would have prolonged, America having not gone in.
Just having a little fun.
Okay, good. Well, that's what the show is all about. Okay, so I asked you who your favorite president is, Abraham Lincoln. But now what I'd like you to do, in the same vein, we're still on the presidents here, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you 4 presidents: Lyndon B. Johnson, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. And we're going to use this as the platform to jump into more current events here. But those 4 presidents, Johnson, Reagan, Clinton, Obama. Rank them from least to greatest for me.
Well, I don't know why I should be the one doing the ranking when the president has already placed himself at number 4 on the totem pole. Now, I don't know who he put ahead of himself, but if you want my personal take,
sure.
I would put Lyndon Johnson at the top. Was Franklin Roosevelt one of the 4?
He was not one of the 4.
Tell me them again.
So it was Johnson, Reagan, Clinton, then Obama.
I'll go Johnson, Clinton, Obama, Reagan.
Okay, you want to explain to us a bit the rationale and logic behind that?
Yeah, I don't think Lyndon Johnson can earn enough credit for the Civil Rights Acts. This was another one of those defining moments. And I'm especially amazed by presidents whose legacy can be defined by what goes on the domestic front. Most presidents are remembered for their foreign policy, and Clinton and Johnson are both guys who are remembered for what they did domestically. Civil rights was the effective end of Reconstruction. It's what enabled blacks to be able to live fair and free and just lives, removing that curse of segregation. I think Bill Clinton was the embodiment of a president who could play to both sides and do so in a thoughtful and empathetic way. I don't think you can sell this president's legislative accomplishments short, but I think in order to earn any kind of place with great Democrats like Johnson and Clinton, he's going to need a second term to prove himself.
Okay, but first term alone, do you see him in the top 10, perhaps, presidents? Think about it. Healthcare, Frank Dodd, GM, assassination, takeout of Osama bin Laden. These are things that he can really take pride in.
Well, yeah. They're big accomplishments, but a lot of them are big question marks still. I don't think we can pass definitive judgment on healthcare until we see what the court says, until certainly we see...
The court's going to come out with a ruling in sometime June, July, yes, on the individual mandate and the constitutionality about that.
I mean, it's a very big change. I think healthcare is one of those fiasco political issues that you can't ever achieve perfect with, so you strive for good, and you don't always know what good is going to look like in implementation. He had a big mandate, and he got it done. But for me, the critical thing that needed to be done when he got into office was financial reform. Dodd-Frank, at this point, is almost a Pyrrhic victory. We haven't seen the provisions played out in the way we wanted to when it was passed. If you read this Goldman Sachs article...
Yeah, that op-ed that came out last week.
That's right. I mean, the corruption that led to the financial crisis.
Well, just for the folks out there who are perhaps not familiar with this op-ed that came out last week, this was a guy, Greg, what was his last name?
Smith, I think?
Greg Smith, I believe, who basically came out with an op-ed in the New York Times, and he basically said, I'm leaving Goldman Sachs after 12 years because Goldman Sachs has turned it back on its culture and how it now looks at its clients as something to take advantage of, as people to take advantage of, and not people to help him manage. And so he left after 12 years, but not before, inserting quite a few resume items in the op-ed. Did you notice that?
Yeah, he talked about how he was a
Rhodes
terrific ping pong player.
For the Maccabee Games, but also a Rhodes National finalist. So I guess he left, all the hedge fund managers out there in New York City with at least...
I mean, he's not going to get a very stirring letter of reference from anyone
from Blank Fine, that's for sure.
But, it was an audacious piece. Like, he absolutely held nothing back. You'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of people say that on the way out, the way he did. But, there's a Twitter feed called GS Elevator, Joseph, and basically it's a running dialogue of what gets said in the elevators at Goldman.
No way, I got it.
And if you thought what was said in Smith's piece was bad, just check out this Twitter account.
And who's running this Twitter account?
Just, I think, middle to lower tier Goldman Sachs employees. It's really funny.
You probably won't be able to share any of that stuff live, will you?
I'd rather not.
You'd rather not. Okay, so we've talked a bit about, your feelings on Obama and etc. But looking towards... and we've talked about the Democratic Party. What I really want to ask you is there an alternative to Barack Obama? Because yes, he has his flaws, for sure. But right now, I don't see alternatives out there in Santorum, in Mitt Romney, in Newt Gingrich, in Ron Paul. Where are these Republican alternatives?
The president we need, Joseph, is someone who is going to say enough with the BS. That is the kind of president we need. And there was a time round about the debt ceiling crisis, which was just a total fiasco last year, when I thought, maybe a Republican can stand up. Chris Christie looked like a guy who could possibly have that kind of spark in him. It didn't manifest itself. I don't think there's a Republican alternative, and I do think Obama can become that guy. But what he has to do is he has to start...
People have actually written that Barack Obama, instead of governing from the left, is actually a Rockefeller Republican in many ways, a moderate Republican of the 1950s sort.
He's not anything. He's predicating his politics not on a strident progressive agenda. And people look at his Osawatomie speech and they say, well, look, he's developing a progressive course.
This was the one in December in Kansas?
Yeah, exactly.
When he was trying to usher in a new progressive...
Name one piece of audacious progressive legislation he's put on the table. Before that, just 2 or 3 months...
Since December, you mean?
Yes. I can't think of one. Before that, just 2 or 3 months before that, he was playing himself out as the Bill Daley centrist figure, the third-way Democrat. And he's always... This is so, I think, salient in assessing Obama. He's always looking for a parallel. He's FDR at the beginning. He's Theodore Roosevelt when he has these strident progressive speeches. Why doesn't he just be Obama? Here is the first African-American president in our country's history who inspired youth the way he did in 2008. Me, not so much, but, why doesn't he take that mantle and just say, I'm going to be the no BS president. I'm going to do what we need to see done, which is fundamental entitlement reform that leads to deficit reduction, coupled with...
Explain to me why he didn't take the Simpson-Bowles Deficit Commission. They gave a great report, right? And what did he do with it? Did he do anything with it? He basically supported it.
He threw it in the trash can.
He threw it in the trash can.
And that committee, and I've read every last word of that report, Joseph. Let me tell you, that committee did really good work. And what the president did, and, liberals often take issue with my critique of the president on this front, and it's so easy to say it's just Republican intransigence. Well, that's not how the legislative process works. Paul Ryan put out a very audacious plan, a plan I don't agree with because it would have turned Medicare into a voucher fund. He's trying to do it again now. Obama could have taken Simpson-Bowles and said, all right, I see your point, let's try to find a middle ground. Instead, he took Paul Ryan, threw him to the wolves, said he was going to throw Granny off a cliff, and used it to win a New York special election. So the president is once again very clever as a politician. He's a very good politician, and I do think he's going to win. But through the course of his good politics, through the course of speeches like the one he gave at Osawatomie, where do we go? How far are we getting? We're not getting much of anywhere. And our deficit continues to build, our economy continues to languish. We point to pinprick drops in the unemployment tally, but the number of discouraged workers is only growing day by day, and it's because we can't get any legislation through the coffers of Congress. That's got to be the goal, and this president hasn't done it.
All right, and you mentioned before, a few minutes ago, Chris Christie. All right, and I know that you know you call yourself a part of the Vital Center.
That's correct.
Right? So explain to me exactly, first of all, what that means, and also talk a bit more about Chris Christie and whether you see him as a hopeful come 2016.
Sure. No,
You having fun, by the way, Connor? You having a good time?
I am having fun.
I'm glad.
This is a great program. should.
You know, people have been going on Facebook telling me that the Facebook page is blowing up. I mean, so listen, Connor, people are actually listening to you currently. Not my mother, not only my mother. I don't even think
I'm flattered.
Yeah, you should be flattered.
They're just in it for you, Joseph. You should know that.
So, Connor, yeah, continue. Chris Christie.
Well,
Vital centrism.
Let me get to this point about the vital center, as I call it. It's this idea that there are two traditions in American politics going back to our founding. You have the Hamiltonian tradition, which is, you got to have an executive take the reins of order and have some collective authority. And then you've got the Jeffersonian tradition, which is the local, decentralized, devolved, let the local side of the political coin figure things out and not the central collected government. And, the fact of the matter is there's no perfect ideology. There's, all human ideologies have their flaws, but principally, there's a place for both the Hamiltonian and the Jeffersonian mindset at the table. And sometimes you need to lean one way, and sometimes you need to lean the other. You can principally prioritize one more than the other, but you should never completely disregard the other as a total evil. I think the Republicans have pretty much done that to the Hamiltonian idea. And I think liberals are starting to fall in that line as well towards the radical anti-government sentiment expressed on the other side. The vital center is being able to take oneself, one's political eye, above this kind of ruckus down below, and say, you know what? We're going to pave a third way. We're going to acknowledge both sides' place, and we're going to construct policies that aren't so committed to ideological obstinacy that we lose sight of our constituents, but instead serve our constituents. That's sort of how I look at the question when I think of the vital center. And, Chris Christie, going to Christie for a second, I think he does have potential. He went on Morning Joe about a month ago, and he talked about this idea of the boulevard of leadership. Now he's principally more and, less of a collective authority kind of political figure, but what he said is, when you're dealing with a legislature, which is fundamentally how you get big change done, in a state and a country, you got to have critical pieces of legislation. This is how Johnson did it, the Johnson treatment. It was famous. Christie said, you have your principles, but you need to pave a boulevard of leadership that reconciles the other side's mindset, the other side's purpose for being there, and that achieves a solution that both sides can find palatable. Mario Cuomo's done this in New York. I mean, here's a key distinction. Again, you don't read about this in the New York Times because they don't really talk about it. Mario Cuomo sat with every major religious leader before he pursued gay marriage legalization. The state legislature in New Jersey tried to rush this issue, and Chris Christie vetoed it. Now, Chris Christie gets panned as an anti-gay bigot, when in fact he knew that it's a bit more complex than just making a political statement. There are very fine...
Why did he veto it?
I think it...
Because he firmly believed...
I mean, part of it is his principal opposition to gay marriage. That's inevitably part of it. But I think part of it was procedural as well. You have to make sure that religious institutions understand what the implications of the bill are, where it's going to take a state. And I think only with that kind of universal empathy and awareness can you get major social and political change done. And these are very finer distinctions with the same kind of legislation, and I think these distinctions that are so critical have been completely undermined at the national level. And you saw, especially with that debt ceiling crisis of last summer. That was just a disaster.
So I appreciate the insight. And you did mention religious institutions and Mario Cuomo dealing with religious institutions in a good way. But Obama, over the past few months, has gone into a bit of trouble. You see the transition, folks? What a great transition this is. Has gone into a bit of trouble with religious institutions over, budget and contraception. Tell us a bit about what this controversy was and where you stand, and maybe perhaps where Obama went wrong, where he went right.
Well, let me tell you an anecdote, Joseph.
Sure.
And this is an anecdote, again, a lot of the press might not be so privy to. But Archbishop Dolan, who was a wonderful man, now Cardinal Dolan, I should say, then Archbishop Dolan, sat with Barack Obama.
He was recently promoted?
Yes, he was.
Congratulations.
Promoted,
And Mazel Tov.
Promoted by B16. He sat with Barack Obama once health care reform was passed. And Obama insisted to him, face to face, you will not have to undergo any kind of onerous need to provide contraception to your employees. Your institutions, your hospitals, etc., don't worry about it. That was his guarantee. And again, Obama, very tactical, very clever, thought he could pull the wool over the eyes of the Archbishop, now Cardinal Dolan. Well, Dolan isn't going to just take it. Dolan's a fighter.
So what, Obama basically went back
Yes, he did.
on this promise.
Cardinal Dolan believes the president lied to him. And, I think that is a big personal affront to a religious leader, on the one hand. On the other, this is actually a significant issue of religious freedom. Catholic hospitals, charities, and institutions are only in the business of healthcare because their faith tells them to do so. So if your faith is the reason for your being in this particular market or venue, you need to acknowledge that the faith is going to have a few other corollary items that need to be considered. And in this case, Humanae Vitae, the 1963 doctrine, not 1963, it was a bit after Vatican II. It was by Paul VI.
A history lesson and a political show.
Paul
ladies
VI.
and gentlemen.
This is a doctrine of the Catholic Church. Now, people are saying 99% of Catholics use contraception. Okay.
It's true. I think actually Poland, for example, which is the most Catholic
Yes,
country in the world, also has one of the highest rates of contraceptive use.
that's true.
Yeah.
And the idea is, okay, but this is a statement of ideals. This is church ideals as written in papal doctrine. And that's the basis for the institutions existing in the first place.
Sure. But if these institutions, Catholic hospitals, for example, are going to be getting federal dollars, and the federal policy is to provide contraception, how on the one hand can you possibly justify and reconcile taking money, but not do and refusing to do what the federal policy is?
Well, they were allocated federal money, so naturally they're going to take it. Now, the federal government can say, we don't want to give Catholic churches and institutions this kind of money if they're not going to provide contraception, but I dare any legislator to consider doing that.
Right, for sure.
Because this is what's lost in the whole ruckus of this discussion. People focus so much on contraception and the fact that some institutions are unwilling to provide it. They lose sight of the vast amount of good that these hospitals and institutions do in healthcare in this country. And I mean, you have to look at both sides. Again, you can't just look at the very narrow focus on contraception. You have to look at the whole panoply of healthcare options that they give to their patients. And you know what? A lot of these doctors are going to tell them where they can get it anyway. I don't think... the real critical story should have been, and it hasn't been published yet, at least I haven't read it, here is a laundry list of people who haven't been able to receive contraception because Catholic institutions won't provide it directly. I haven't seen that article anywhere. And if anyone does have it, well, we're on Facebook right now, too, so you can link it to my Facebook, and I'll be sure to give it a read.
Perfect. So, Connor, a few other questions that I have for you. So far, we've had a good 20 minutes going. We have a lot of people listening over the air, people, tuning in, asking questions. One question that we have here is if you were elected president. Okay, I'm lying. No one actually asked this question. No one. This is a question I prepared for you. I'm going to be totally honest with you. You are president. Okay, you are elected. Congratulations, you were elected come November time. Okay, what is the first thing that you tackle? I want to get into a bit of a debate here because if I let you talk, you sound very eloquent. You've had your fair share, but now it's my turn to really, fight you here.
Please.
Debate me on something. You're president. What are you going to do?
Simpson Bowls.
What's that?
Simpson Bowls.
Okay, so first of all, a few of those things, a few key elements of the Simpson Bowls. How are they going to reduce the deficit? Go.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you have basic entitlement reform.
Okay, that means raising eligibility levels to what age?
About 70.
I think that's good.
Fair. I don't see... I mean, this is a sensitive issue. But I don't see why work has to be a four-letter word in this country. I mean, Alexis de Tocqueville famously said in the mid-19th century, here in America, This is my favorite quote. Where fortunes are small and ill-secured, everyone works, and work leads to everything. And I think it's only a nominal difference between 67 and 70 when it comes to retirement age. And if you have a president that stands at the bully pulpit, and this president loves to stand at the bully pulpit, and says this is a critical test, we need to move forward with fundamental reform, and it's going to require a bit of sacrifice on all of our parts, not raising taxes on people with the least amount of income or the middle class, nothing like that, but asking them to work for another 3 years before they retire, just to ensure the continued solvency for our generation, Joseph. I think that is an eminently reasonable request.
I think so too. And if you were president and I was a member of Congress, a senator from the great state of New York, I would sign on to that. Because, when the Social Security Act was passed in 1935, the eligibility age was 65, while the average life expectancy was 62. So these things, they have to modernize. And that's what you're basically saying. You want to cut
The second thing I want to talk about is this whole tax issue. This was just months and months of President Obama saying, we don't want to raise taxes on the middle class. Republicans want to cut taxes on the wealthy. We need to make the wealthy pay their fair share. This is a terrible way of framing tax reform, because that's not the issue. If you read Bill Clinton's book, Back to Work, in which in the first 20 pages he invokes the Simpson-Bowles propositions some 50 to 60 times, by the way, he gets it. What Clinton talks about is a simple removing of all of the corrupt loopholes and exemptions in the system. You have ExxonMobil that pays 17.6% in graduated income tax annually. I mean, that's absurdly low, and it's because of all the oil lobby that's surrounding Congress.
Same thing
right
with
now.
Companies like GE.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, you've got also these, what I think are ridiculous capital gains exemptions. I mean, Mitt Romney pays 10% of a tax on I don't know how many millions of dollars, and he's just sitting writing books and campaigning for president. I mean, that's criminal when you have a secretary who pays 35% of his or her income annually. Now, the key is to create equal accountability among the wealthy. Because while there are wealthy, like the Mitt Romneys, who pay only 10%, an egregiously low amount.
There are others like the lawyers and the doctors
there
out there.
There are lawyers, doctors who pay 35 and 40% in combined state and federal income taxes. To say that they should pay more, when if you look at those rates, I mean, they're comparable, even a bit lower compared to Canada and the majority of European Union countries. I mean, I think that's just absurd. I think the key is to just make equal accountability where it needs to be had, and you'll get that kind of income increase that you need to help fight off this deficit.
So we've talked, so raising eligibility, raising taxes. I'm agreeing with you on these things. Or raising taxes at least for the Mitt Romneys and the Warren Buffetts out there. Okay.
Exactly.
What else? You're president. What else are you going to do? How, for example, are you going to get, the 5 million plus unemployed right now? How are you going to get them jobs?
I don't think there's...
Is there much that we can do for them at this point? I mean, is it just a matter of time just waiting for... Well, let me ask you this question.
Please.
Okay. Obama passed a stimulus package in 2009, February 2009, a month after coming into office. And only now are we really seeing some serious job gains. You actually came in with a copy of The Economist. And what does it say on The Economist? Right?
Finally,
the recovery is here. So my question to you is, was it really just a matter of time? Stimulus package for sure. It helped, helped plug in state budget holes and etc. But where was the cause and effect here? Was it really just giving the private sector a breathing room? Was it really just about letting it bottom out before picking itself up again? Where was Obama? Is it just policy? Is it policy or providence when it comes to February and January of 2012's job postings?
Well, I think, Obama's foreign policy comes in a bit here too, and I'll touch on that. But I do think that's exactly what did it. Filled the gap where it needed to be filled. I don't think the stimulus was a very thoughtful piece of legislation. It was rushed. A lot of it just moved employment around rather than creating employment. A lot of it was a redundant kind of employment in manufacturing. We got to get to the bigger questions here, Joseph. The stimulus is fine, but...
So what's the bigger question?
The bigger question and the bigger point that I think I'd like to make is we're witnessing in the 21st century, at this stage in the 21st century, a reassessment of what we consider to be the American dream. The American dream is no longer mom and pop with a white picket fence and a house on the road. The American dream is going to be based in startups. It's going to be based in technology. It's going to be based in internet
You'd
industry.
be reading a lot of David Brooks and Thomas Friedman.
And Walter Russell Mead will throw in there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, these are going to be very small ventures. And they can create a lot of money and a lot of capital. But it's going to be done in a way where we need to fundamentally break a lot of our conceptions of traditional ways of boosting GDP and boosting employment in the process of boosting GDP. Now, I think, this president has done a tremendous job with foreign policy. And with that, we're seeing a global economy that has sort of permeated our own domestic.
Is Libya going to be
picture.
the new model to base all future interventions? Did you read that article?
Well, that's a big jump. That's a big jump
yeah.
from what we've been talking about. But
okay, continue what you were talking about before. Then I apologize.
It can't be, by the way. But
we're gonna have to invite you back on the show in a
sneak
few
that in
weeks
there.
for you to talk more about that.
No, he's done a lot of good with China. He's done a lot of good with the Far East. We've had a lot of successful.
What's his progress look like when it comes to China? What has he done with China?
He's the Pacific Pivot. I mean, this is the basis for his November 17th, 2011 speech to the Australian Parliament.
And Henry Kissinger mentioned this.
This is his idea of a Pacific League, to create a new means of bringing people
transferring
together.
attention and resources away from the Middle East.
I think
towards
when you look
the
at the
Pacific.
fact that the government has tried to invest on the domestic front and has tried to create new avenues of trade in a globalized economy to spur the development of new jobs in a new era of innovation, I think that's why we're seeing some success on the American home front. However, as we see more success, as interest rates, begin to return to their post-recession levels, we're going to have to address this issue of the deficit. And to be frank, his most recent budget was just a political statement. It did nothing to address the issue of the deficit. David Brooks touched on this in his last piece. Obama is the cagey political president. He talks about how he likes something and then takes a step in the opposite direction. He's going to have to fight assertively both on behalf of deficit reduction, acknowledging this change and how an American life is lived in the 21st century. I think that would be audacious and a break from this constant, we need to find a parallel for this particular moment. We need to be a Roosevelt, a Teddy, or an FDR.
So you're saying enough for the parallels?
Enough with the parallels. Let's break new ground. This is the transformative president achieving his consummative moment. Beginning of term 2.
Be audacious.
He's going to have to be audacious because he's going to have
use that word
crisis.
in the title of his book, right? The Audacity of Hope?
Well, there wasn't much that was audacious in the Audacity of Hope, but he has the potential to be audacious. He has the potential for that moment. He made the mistake of thinking it was all just going to fall into his lap after, the election, and reality hit like a brick wall. But he has the time now to thoughtfully plan this out. And he's going to have to address it because, again, we're going to have the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. We're going to have
the end of this year, correct?
We're going to have another deficit ceiling fight. These are not going to be wishy-washy, middle of the road. I'm going to peter out and try to sneak by with saving face. He's going to be a lame duck if he gets reelected. He should just go for it. And I think that's what the people are waiting to see, the kind of no-nonsense, go-for-it attitude of a political leader in this country. And I hope, I don't wish, I'm not, for the love of God, we want to see our president succeed. This is a way that he can succeed. And I think the American people, the next Renaissance political figure is going to be an audacious political figure, and he has a chance to claim that mantle, and he should seize it.
Well, on that note, Mr. Conor Crawford, thank you so much for coming in. It's already 6 p.m. It's already 6 o'clock.
Time flies.
Time flies. Tempest fugit. I mean, those were some quick 30 minutes. So I want to thank everybody out there on the airs, all those people listening in their living rooms
and let me say,
yes,
Joseph,
Conor, you want to say something?
This is my first time on the show. I think it's just terrific. I think Yaleys are very interested in politics, but it's about time that we find some forum to broadcast it. And I think what you're doing is terrific.
Well, thank you so much, Conor. I appreciate that a lot. So, Conor, thanks once again for joining us. Next week, guys, at 5:30 p.m., next Monday, I'll be here. I don't know exactly who'll be joining us. It'll be a surprise. But I look forward to seeing you guys all then. Thanks once again for tuning in. Have a good evening.